I might exaggerate a lot, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that I'm never going to top this. In the summer of 2021, I took a life-changing trip to Iceland, and one of the major reasons it was life-changing was because of the bakery that I visited in Reykjavik. I'm going to try my best here, but it's called Brød and Company, or Bread and Company. It's highly rated for a lot of reasons, and I went there multiple times during my trip, but one of their main attractions is their cinnamon rolls, which I did get to try I think twice, and they're as good as anything I've eaten in my lifetime. And some great news is they posted the recipe to their Instagram page about a year ago. As soon as I saw that, I scrambled to get all the ingredients and make a video about it. So here's me attempting to duplicate this life-changing experience at home. Yeah, this is going to be a good one. So there are a few stark differences that I'm going to be doing with this recipe, partially from reading the comments on the post and seeing what people did differently that worked for them, but also some of the things that I don't have available, namely the fresh yeast. I'm going to be using active dry yeast because that's what I have, and I've read a little bit about it, and I think it changes some of the things with this recipe. So they don't have you bloom the fresh yeast because I guess you don't need to do that. It's more apt for the long, cold rises, which is what this recipe does. There is no countertop rise in their recipe, but I'm going to be doing that just because it's more applicable for what we're using. The quantity I'm going to be using is a little bit lower than the fresh yeast because you have to multiply it by a low factor when converting it to dry. I'm not too worried about it, but we'll see what happens. So I'm going to take a little bit of the sugar that we're already going to be using. Had the wrong sugar there. So I'm going to steal a little bit of the sugar that we're going to be using in the dough anyway and help the yeast rise, or help the yeast proof, that is. This is a warm water, by the way. They recommend using room temperature water, but again, they're using fresh yeast and I'm using dry. So it was really cool. When I was in Iceland eating this, I was just thinking about how this is definitely the best pastry that I've ever had in my life. And only a few months after the trip, they posted the recipe on Instagram. I just didn't follow them and I never looked. Until a couple of months ago, I noticed that they did post it over a year ago, and I was so stoked to try it. This has to be good. So one of a few main differences that separates this from a regular cinnamon roll recipe is the type of flour that they use, and this is the Tipo 00 flour, which is mainly used in authentic pasta and pizza recipes. I've never seen it used in a pastry recipe. It's a finer grind of flour. I don't know exactly how that's going to affect the texture of our final product, but I know it gets you more tender crust in like a Neapolitan pizza. It just comes out better in pastas as far as I know. But if that's what they use in the one that I tried in Iceland, then I'm all for it. This seems like a lot of flour proportionally to the sugar and the butter compared to the recipes that I've made. Don't quote me on that because I don't know for sure, but I also usually use milk instead of water. There's no milk besides the butter in this recipe. So it's just interesting to see how this plays differently in different locations. So as you can see, my yeast has proofed really nicely.
Frothy boy.
So I'm gonna add almost all of my ingredients, sugar and salt, and of course the yeast mixture. And then there's 1 egg in this recipe. The only thing I'm going to leave out right now is the butter. Their recipe calls for you to mix everything together at once, but in my experience with brioche doughs and stuff, just because the fats in the butter kind of inhibit the gluten development of the dough. But I'm not a pastry expert, so I don't know for sure. I'm just guessing here. So I'm going to mix this first. Let everything kind of incorporate before I lift it up a bit. All right, now that everything is kind of incorporated, I'm going to add in my butter bit by bit. By the way, most enriched doughs like this, you really don't want to make without a stand mixer. I mean, it's technically possible by hand, but it is so much work, and it's really hard to actually knead this with your hands. It says to kick this up to high speed for like 8 minutes and let it knead itself, so I'm going to do that. All right, so let's see. Dough is super smooth, and it stretches nice and well. That's all we have to do for the first day. Dough-wise, jeez. This thing really stuck itself on there. Okay. Grip strength. Eventually. It's definitely because my hands are greasy, not because I'm not strong. This is ridiculous. Has this never happened to anybody else before? Oh, there it is. I was saying this is all we have to do for the dough on the first day. Their recipe states that you can go straight into the fridge overnight. However, they're using fresh yeast and we're using dry yeast. And somebody in the comments recommended to do a 1 to 2 hour warm rise first on the countertop if you're using dry yeast, which we are. Kind of bring this into a ball a little bit. It's definitely a smooth dough. I feel like the 00 flour makes a difference, but that remains to be seen until we actually make these. I don't want to do this on my countertop because it's not super clean, so just with my clean hands. All right, it's a beautiful baby. I'm just gonna let this go for a couple of hours on my countertop and then I'll move it to the fridge until tomorrow. All right, one more order of business for today is to make the cinnamon roll filling. So this is similar to your standard cinnamon roll filling, but this is also different. You've got your cinnamon, sugar, and butter as well, which I'm assuming they're using white sugar because they don't specify brown sugar. I could be wrong, but oh well. But the main difference here is the use of this marzipan. So this is called an almond candy dough. It's just a really sweetened almond paste. I don't think I've ever had that in any kind of pastry except for these cinnamon rolls that I got in Iceland. But again, if this helps make these what they are, then I'm definitely here for it. Yeah, that's pretty sweet, and there's a lot of sugar already in this filling, so I'm sure it's gonna be very sweet. But yeah, that kind of calls back to the flavor of cinnamon roll that I had, which is kind of crazy. I see why it was so distinct, but this is really good. So I don't know if this is the best way to get this stuff out, but here we are trying. Some people said they struggled spreading this filling on the dough because of the marzipan, which it is kind of solid, but hopefully having it at room temperature with the butter being softened helps. And I believe this recipe specifically calls out the Odense brand, which is what I got. I could only find this on Amazon, but I'll link it below. But if we have the exact same thing that they use at the bakery, then that's really good news. All right, so I just need a portion of this second tube here. So now I have a couple of tubes of this stuff just sitting around. Aside from making this cinnamon roll recipe again, what else can I use this for? Any ideas? So it first says to mix the marzipan with the sugar, and it mentions doing this with a spatula, but I'm just gonna use the paddle attachment on my stand mixer. I don't think I'll have any problems. Okay, I don't think this is going to come together on its own. Hopefully with the butter, it can become more cohesive. It does say to add the butter in slowly, kind of like we did with the dough. By the way, I forgot to mention I am using Kerrygold butter because there's so much butter in this recipe that I think higher quality butter is going to make a big difference. So we'll add it in while it's mixing. Okay, so the butter has definitely softened this up a bit and made it smooth, which is great. Lastly, we're just going to add in our cinnamon, which this was a big point of contention on the recipe as well. They called for using 75 grams, which people said made this inedible. Someone said they dropped it to 35 grams and it was still too strong. So I'm gonna go ahead and put like 20 grams and hopefully that's enough, which 20 grams of cinnamon is a lot. Cinnamon is super strong. This is still more than I call for in my cinnamon roll recipes, so I think it'll be okay. Final scrape down and make sure everything is well incorporated. This looks great. It's exactly what I was seeing in their video, so I feel good about it. Tastes like just the right amount of cinnamon too, so I would say 20 grams is a good amount if you're gonna make this. It's got a really distinct taste from the marzipan, just what I remember from when I was there. This is gonna be great. This is for me. Now just put this into a bowl to leave overnight. This one's left at room temperature, which is really important because if you put this butter back in the fridge, it's gonna solidify and be impossible to spread. But I don't think this will have any problem spreading at this consistency. By the way, those of you that watch my videos, do you have any preference on how I do them? This is just me following a recipe, so I don't have a voiceover as much. But do you like seeing me talk through this stuff live, or would you rather me still do it in post like I usually do? Just trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. All right, there we go. We have everything in place for tomorrow. I'm just gonna put the dough in the fridge in another hour or so when it's done proofing, and then I'll see y'all for the bake.
The next day.
All right, I took this dough out a few hours ago to bring it to room temperature. It deflated a bit in the fridge, which is usual for a cold ferment. Now the recipe doesn't call for you to flour your work surface when you're rolling this out, but in my experience, it's necessary. I just don't want this to stick while I'm trying to roll it up. All right, let's roll this out. Pretty good. I just need to get it a little thinner, so I'm gonna bring it long ways a little bit. One major mistake that a lot of people make, including myself when making cinnamon rolls, is not rolling the dough thin enough. It gives you less rolls and less layers of the filling, which is a little sad in my opinion. Trying to even out these corners a bit so that this comes out evenly. Okay, I feel like that's thin enough, so time for some filling. Which, like I said, this has been out at room temperature overnight. Hopefully it spreads really nicely. The key is getting a nice and thin layer, but also making it even across this. It's not the easiest stuff to spread, so I'm gonna take my time to try to not rip my dough. All right, that took me like 20 minutes, but I think I did a pretty decent job. Try to get a pretty thin and even film across the top. Now it's time to roll. What you gotta do is super tightly to make the best presentation. I can see why they didn't use flour in their video because it sticks to the surface and makes it a little easier to roll because it has more tension with the countertop, but this will work too. All right, we're looking good. It's time to cut this into 12 rolls. I'm not confident using a knife on these, so I'm gonna go get some dental floss. And they show you in the video to take the roll and put this flap underneath the bottom to stick it and hold it together. And then when you put it on the sheet tray, you just kind of press it a little bit. Don't these just look beautiful? All that we have to do now is cover them in plastic wrap and let them rise for like 2 to 3 more hours. Alright, these are puffed up beautifully. Look at these. Just need to brush these with some egg wash, and then they'll be ready to bake. And then they just say a little dusting of powdered sugar before they go in the oven. We are almost there. Alright, these kind of bloomed out of themselves in the oven, which isn't going to look best for the thumbnail, but I don't think it'll affect the taste too much. I'm just going to let them cool and I'll be right back. Still looks beautiful as ever. I'm going to finish with a little more powdered sugar just to make it look nice. Alright, I like what I'm seeing here. Of course this calls for vanilla milk. Alright, so admittedly I didn't do a perfect job. The ones at the bakery have way more spirals, which means it's a longer dough, and they got more rolls out of it. And mine obviously toppled over themselves because I guess they didn't have enough layers, but they smell amazing and it still reminds me of what I got in Iceland. I really just need to dig into this, so cheers. Oh man. Yeah, that's it. I am back in Iceland. The filling is so signature, it takes you right back. And yeah, this is so good that it doesn't need icing, which says a lot because I love icing. Just such a light and fluffy dough. I cooked it a hair too long on the outside. Next time I'll go a little shorter. But the inside maintains that tender chewiness. It's so good. I'm in heaven. I could try for a long time and I still would not be able to beat this. Of course, I recommend you to try this because it's public information now. Drop down the cinnamon significantly like I did. But even if you don't feel like going through all this, at least make this filling and put it into your own cinnamon rolls because it's just next level. Yeah, this just brings me back to really good times. Thank you to Brud and Company for releasing this recipe. It's really awesome. So a bit of a longer video because I rambled a lot throughout the recipe making process. But if you do like this style better, should I try it more often and work on it, get better at it? Or would you just rather the narration style that I usually do? Either way, I appreciate those of you that are still around. Channel's not doing too well anymore, but I'm not ready to give up yet. I'm just gonna keep trying and see if something ends up working. As always, thank you guys for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. Now what do I do with the other 11 of these?